This is our last day in the book of Ruth, and so just to set the tone, here we go. Previously in the book of Ruth. Things heat up between Ruth and Boaz as Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, has instructed her to go to Boaz after he's had a hard day's work winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Ruth is instructed to make herself known to him in his sleep and wait for his instructions. But Ruth takes matters into her own hands and makes a move indicating that Boaz should marry her and redeem Naomi's land as he is the next of kin. Boaz is taken by Ruth's proposal, but notes that there is another kinsman who has the first right of refusal, but also makes it clear that she and Naomi will be cared for. Ruth returns to Naomi, who assures her that Boaz will settle this matter soon. Dun, 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 dun. What will happen? Who is this other next of kin? Is he the true next of kin? Will he accept? And if so, what of Ruth and Boaz and their budding love? Find out right now as Mary Parrish reads for us the final chapter of the book of Ruth.
Hard act to follow. Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through 17. No sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down there than the next of kin of whom Boaz had spoken came passing by. So Boaz said, "Come over here, sit down here." And he went over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the town and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. He then said to the next of kin, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of these sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me so that I may know. For there is no one prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you." So he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance." At this, the next of kin said, "I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging to confirm a transaction. The one took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the next of kin said to Boaz, "Acquire it for yourself," he took off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses today that I have acquired from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred and from the gate of his native place. Today you are all witnesses." Then all the people who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you produce children in Ephrathah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. And through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then they came together. The Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women in the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David.
So there you go. That shocking, thrilling ending where it's like, oh my goodness, it all goes back to David. Oh, but it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. I think you've seen. There's a lot of sort of nuggets and historical context in here, though, that I think we need to deal with to understand what's going on. And first of all, we need to look at this Redeemer stuff, which is kind of strange. But basically, this is how it works. Leviticus 25:25 says, "If any of your kin falls into difficulty and sells a piece of property, then the next of kin shall come and redeem what the relative has sold." This was a way to make things fair when people fall into hard times and they need to sell their land or whatever resources they have to somebody to make ends meet. There should be some other kinsman that comes along and ultimately redeems that land when they can for the person. This is how we get some of the theology that I don't particularly like around Jesus being our Redeemer and purchases us. Have you ever heard of that? That he purchased us with his own blood? That is a connection to this law of Jesus purchasing for us, redeeming our inheritance, which is heaven and all of that. But that's where that comes from, so I wanted to make sure I note that. I don't necessarily jive with that theology myself, but it's there. But in this context, what likely happened is because of the famine, remember in chapter 1, Elimelech probably sold his land, which is probably what funded their emigration to Moab, which kind of gets this whole story going. But at this point, whoever it is that owns the land at this time has maybe owned it long enough that it's going to get very difficult to redeem it. So there's a sense of urgency to get this land redeemed for Naomi because it is the key to Naomi and Ruth's independence, their well-being. This is what's going to allow them to really survive. This redemption thing is their path. Ruth says in chapter 3 to Boaz that he is the next of kin. And so he should redeem the land for Naomi. But Boaz says, no, there's this other one that's actually the next of kin. And so we saw that. But there's also this concept of levirate marriage, which we've talked about before, which you see in this text. Boaz says to this next of kin, you should redeem the land for Naomi. And he says, sure. But there's also this thing called levirate marriage, which is another requirement, which says this: if a man dies childless, his brother is required to marry the widow for the sake of bearing children and carrying on the familial line. And so Boaz also says, if you're going to redeem Naomi's land, you also need to marry Ruth, because Ruth is a widow to a fatherless, or to a childless father. In Deuteronomy 25, it says, if a man has no desire to marry his brother's widow, then the brother's widow shall go to the elders at the gate, and you heard that in the text. They meet at the gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name. He will not perform the duty of his brother to me. And then all this other stuff goes on. What's key to note here is that Ruth's husband's brother is also dead. So there is no brother to marry her, which means it's now up to the next of kin. Although in this case, it's not as much of a requirement as it is for the brother. It's sort of like, will you do this? And when this next of kin here, who's not named, one of the things I love about the book of Ruth is like a lot of the women get names and a lot of the men don't. It's a nice shift from what we usually get. But he's not named, and he says, well, I could redeem Naomi's land, but if I marry Ruth, that's going to impact my own inheritance to my kids and all of this, and that's a liability to me. I can't do it. And so there we go. Boom. If you can't do both, you can't do one. Because remember, Ruth and Naomi are a package deal. Ruth says in chapter 1, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. And so here we go. Boaz redeems Naomi's land and marries Ruth. So those two things are really what is at play and leads us to the end of this story. And the thing that I want to kind of land on and point out here in this story is the way in which everybody's behaving really well. Have you noticed that? There's the potential for a lot of conflict. We talked about the xenophobia that was thick in Israel at this time. Remember in chapter 1, Israel is coming back from exile, and since they were in exile, they were interacting with all kinds of other people and religions and cultures, and so there was a great fear of outsiders because they might muddy the race, that whole racial purity thing that often cultures get concerned about. That would never happen here in America. Sarcasm. So there's great fear of the immigrant. And so when Naomi comes back with this Moabite, and remember the text continually refers to her as Ruth the Moabite, they're highlighting her outsider identity. They're highlighting it. But the people continually respond to her with grace and affirmation and see her as an asset to their community, commending her for taking care of one of their own in Naomi. And this next of kin guy that we don't really know, it's just a nice conversation between two guys about, hey, how do you want to work this out? Here's what the rules say. I'm playing nice here, and then he's playing nice, and everybody is responding well in a time and in a space where things could go really badly. It reminds me of two of my favorite TV shows. And I think they're probably two of my favorite TV shows because of this. One of them is Northern Exposure, and the other one is Schitt's Creek. Anybody ever seen any of those two shows? Yeah. Both of them are sort of fish out of water stories. In Northern Exposure, you have Dr. Fleischman, who's this Columbia University educated doctor who had the premise is that his medical debt, his med school debt is paid for if he will go and serve for 4 years in Anchorage, Alaska. But Anchorage, Alaska ends up being this tiny little town called Cicely, Alaska, in the middle of nowhere. And so he's this urban New York Jewish doctor in the middle of a community that is just quirky and strange and small, and it's beautiful, and everybody accepts everybody. In fact, one of my favorite episodes is one called Kaddish for Uncle Manny, where Joel needs a minion of 10 people, which is kind of what we had in this story, to say Kaddish for his uncle who died. And so the whole community goes out to try to find 10 Jews, because he needs 10 Jews to do this. They all band together to try to find 10 Jews so Joel can say Kaddish for his Uncle Manny. And what Joel realizes is he doesn't need 10 Jews, because what it's about is his community sitting with him. And so the whole community just gathers with him and says Kaddish for Uncle Manny. It's beautiful. It's like Ruth's story. This outsider in the whole community comes around them. And in Schitt's Creek, you've got these New York high-style, high-to-do people who end up in losing everything except this one little hotel, again in a little quirky town. And there's all kinds of reason for them to be ostracized. A little town like this might be relatively homophobic, but they don't care that David is gay. They just like David. There's just all this opportunity for hate and fear and exclusion, but that's not what happens. The town embraces them, and they embrace the town. And you again have another one of these stories of communities choosing love and exclusion over fear and exclusion. And it's beautiful, and I think that's what the book of Ruth is all about. It's about another quirky little town, the town of Bethlehem. and these two women who are strong, and they take their own strength and they take their own power to try to survive, to make their lives go, and that is reciprocated with love and inclusion by this little town of Bethlehem, where everybody seems to be getting along and behaving well. I said at the beginning of this that the book of Ruth kind of serves as a counter-narrative to the xenophobia in Israel at the time. And I think it can also serve as a counter-narrative to the fear and the division and the xenophobia and all the other isms and obias that we are experiencing right now in this nation. This is a counter-narrative. People moving toward the stranger with curiosity, not fear. With love, not hate. With recognizing their strength, recognizing their value, recognizing the asset that they are to their community, and not seeing them as a threat or a liability. The book of Ruth, if you want a biblical argument for why we should be welcoming the strangers in our midst today, it is the book of Ruth. You don't need just the one little verse, somewhere. You have an entire book that is about people of difference coming together as a community to lift one another up, to serve one another, and to build a better world around them. I am so grateful for the book of Ruth and all of the people in it, in particular Ruth and Naomi, who get this thing going in their own strength, finding their way. For Ruth, a new land, for Naomi, an old land, and to spin their lives into something beautiful and glorious. I believe this book is the counter-narrative in the current climate in our nation right now. Embrace it, and let's try to live it out ourselves, which I know we are already doing. But we need to keep spreading that and building this kind of beautiful community where we moved toward each other with curiosity, not fear, and love, not hate. Let's pray. God, thank you for the book of Ruth. It's all right there. What else is there to say, oh God? That in the end, it's people that matter. No matter who we are, how we identify, who we love, where we're from, people are what matter. Help us to see in every stranger we meet the asset and the value that they bring to our lives. May that be our posture in this world. Amen. All right, beloved, let's stand together as you're able to do so comfortably, and we'll sing our responsive hymn.